Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. This is Susan Terrio from the CCRS Center. We'll get started in just a couple minutes while some of your colleagues join us. Hello, this is the Leveraging ESSA, Perkins, and WIOA to support a college and career readiness workforce webinar. We are going to get started in just a couple minutes. We're just letting a few other folks join. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Leveraging ESSA, Perkins, and WIOA to support a college and career ready workforce. We're really glad to be sharing this information with you today and are looking forward, all of the presenters are looking forward to it. So before we get started, I wanted to give you a few housekeeping tips about engaging with us. So all of you are in listen only mode. But if you do have a question, please feel free to put your question in the questions and answers box. I will and my colleague Jenny Scala will be monitoring the questions, and we'll be asking some for clarifying purposes throughout the presentation, but also we'll save some for the end. If there are any questions that are unanswered, we'll be happy to answer them after the webinar. And so you can see here that this is where the question box is, and you can see here that you can also raise your hand, and that's another way, to provide feedback is through the post-event feedback survey, which will be at the end of this event. And we really, really, really encourage you to complete that survey as we really use that information to kind of shape and think through our future work. Also, I wanted to let you know that we are recording the webinar today, and you will be able to obtain a recording of this webinar at the link shown here. So today's webinar, we're basically going to start with some welcomes and introductions. I will set the context for the discussion, and then Ellen Cushing, the Deputy Director of the CCRS Center, will discuss findings from our College and Career Readiness and Success Center and Octave project. And then finally, we'll review some of the resources that were developed based on this project to support you as state and regional folks to support a college and career readiness workforce. So first, I'd like to also get started and just say, what is the College and Career Readiness and Success Center, or which is a mouthful, and that's why we call it the CCRS Center. The CCRS Center is housed at the American Institutes for Research, and we really are designed to help build the capacity of state education agencies and local education agencies to implement college and career readiness initiatives. So really what our mission is to foster capacity of a vibrant set of networks of practitioners, researchers, innovators, and experts to come together and build and sustain a system of support for states as they implement strategies to improve college and career readiness of students in their states. And then eventually the success of students into the workforce. So we're really focusing here today and highlighting some of the work we did as part of this partnership with Octave, focused on aligning education to the workforce pipeline. And we put together a number of resources, including a brief that provides an overview of ESSA, Perkins, and WIOA, as well as in places with overlap to support college and career readiness, as well as a searchable tool that you can use to identify key areas and aspects of college and career readiness and see where the overlap is between ESSA, WIOA, and Perkins. We also developed a planning tool that states or regions could use to start to think about ways they could use these three funding sources in a more coherent way, both programmatically in terms of resources. So today's presenters, and I neglected to introduce myself from the start. My name is Susan Theriault. I'm the director of the College and Career Readiness and Success Center. And I told you a little bit about the center already. We also have Sharon Lee Miller, who's the director of the Division of Academic and Technical Education with the U.S. Department of Education Office of Vocational and Adult Education. She's also a native of New York, Schenectady, New York. And then we have Ellen Cushing, who is the Deputy Director of the College and Career Readiness and Success Center, and who really spearheaded this work that we'll be sharing today. And she's a native of Rhode Island, and I should say I am of Massachusetts, just to be equal among our presenters. So first, we're going to start with a quick polling question. We really like to do this just to be able to get a gauge on, our audience. So you can see the polling question now. If you could just take a look at it and rate your knowledge of your state's ESSA plan, which is the Every Student Succeeds Act plan, and let us know how familiar you are with it. The options are very, in terms of I've read it and I'm familiar with its content, moderate, which means I'm familiar with parts that are most relevant to me in particular in my job, or somewhat where I'm aware that there's a plan and I know about some details but haven't really read it, or not at all. I didn't know there was an ESSA plan, or I just haven't seen it at all. So go ahead, the poll is open. Please feel free to indicate which of you best describes you. Oh, there we go. All right, I'm going to give it a couple more seconds in case you haven't clicked yet. All right, let's show the results. Interesting. So actually, not many of the folks in the audience have read it and are very familiar with the ESSA plan contents, but there is definitely, in the moderate and somewhat category, quite a few folks who have some information or some details, with about 40% able to see specifically what's relevant to them. Great, so that's very helpful. Okay, so first I'd like to hand it off to Sharon, who's going to provide a welcome from the Office of Career Technical and Adult Education, or OCTAE. Sharon?
Great. Thank you, Susan, and thank you to the entire team at CCRS for their partnership on this project. And I also want to do a shout out to one of my colleagues, Robin Utz, who is the chief of our College and Careers branch, who has provided the leadership to this project from the Office of Career and Technical Education. As Susan said, I am Sharon Miller, and I'm the director of the Division of Academic and Technical Education. And on behalf of our office, we want to welcome you to this webinar on the intersections among the major pieces of federal legislation that impact education and workforce development in our nation. As you know, for well over the past decade, states and local communities have really been stepping up their efforts to develop high-quality CTE programs to address the nation's growing skills gap and the need for sufficiently trained workers to fill middle-class skills jobs. These are the jobs that require post-secondary education and training beyond high school, but do not require a 4-year degree. Effective high-quality CT programs are aligned not only with college and career readiness standards, but also with the needs of employers, industry, and labor. They provide students with a curriculum based on integrated academic and technical content and strong employability skills. And they provide work-based learning opportunities that enable students to connect what they are learning to real-life career scenarios and choices. The students participating in effective CTE programs graduate with industry certifications or licenses and post-secondary certificates or degrees that employers use to make hiring and promotion decisions. These students are well-positioned to become the country's next leaders and entrepreneurs, and they are empowered to pursue further schooling and training as their educational and career needs evolve. Building these high-quality CT programs requires deliberate and effective use of local, state, and federal resources. This webinar is designed to provide you with information on using your federal resources under the 3 major pieces of legislation that are required to align education to the workforce pipeline. And these 3 pieces of legislation are the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act, or Perkins as we like to call it, the Every Student Succeeds Act, and the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. Fortunately, as you'll see on this webinar, there are a lot of resources already out there to help you, and you do not need at all to start from scratch. Our office uses Perkins National Activities Funds. We get about $7.8 million annually, and we put these funds into the college, the CCRS, and to develop the tools and resources, and we're delighted to present them to you today. So with that, I'll turn the webinar back over to Susan.
Thank you, Sharon. That was a great stage setting for us. So where I wanted to start is, why are we here today? And this is really about the imperative. So I'm sure you've all seen these statistics before. They're from the Georgetown Center on Education and Workforce. And basically what we're seeing is there's a new minimum. There's going to be a demand, as Sharon mentioned, for more middle skills jobs, which are really those jobs that require some post-secondary training, but not necessarily a 4-year degree. And so among the 55 million jobs that are being created, 65% of them are going to require some kind of post-secondary training. But currently we only have about, as of 2020, we will only be able to fill about a quarter of those. So there will be 5 million unfilled positions based on the trajectory that we currently have. And so really what we see here is a need to increase the opportunity for students to be able to access and transition into post-secondary training and to understand their career interests and the directions that they want to go. So we see again that while there are many jobs beyond middle skill jobs, the middle skill jobs area has the largest gap, and that's really grounded in this equity of opportunity issue with regard to being able to access post-secondary education. So if we unpack the 65% here, you can see middle skill that makes up about over 50% are middle skills jobs. And if we're going to align workforce needs with education, there's some key factors we need to think about or include, and that is post-secondary preparedness, exactly what kinds of skills employers want and can use to be able to gainfully employ these individuals, and the degree to which students are feeling prepared for accessing these jobs. So there's a few things that we should take a look at. So overall, we all know this great story where approximately 83%, the high school graduation rate is at 83%. So 83% of high school seniors high schoolers are graduating from high school. However, there's still these persistent gaps in the graduation rate. So there's for English learners, for example, only 65% of students graduate from high school with a diploma. And among students from families that are economically disadvantaged, only 76% of those students have a high school diploma. Why is a high school diploma so important? Well, it's a critical milestone and prerequisite for being able to access post-secondary education. So then when we start to look at post-secondary remediation rates, we see that even those students who are meeting that prerequisite of a high school diploma, the remediation rates are quite high. For students who go on to a 4-year institution, they're about 20%. But for students who go on to a 2-year institution, which is going to be one of the key places where students get trained for those middle skill jobs that we said are so there's a need for, about more than half of those students participate in some sort of remediation rates. And when you take a little bit of a closer look into this statistic, you'll see that even students who are considered to have taken a post-secondary ready curriculum or who are well prepared for post-secondary education based on some of the criteria in terms of rigor of mathematics courses and literacy and English language arts courses, you'll see that even those that are highly prepared will participate in remediation, which means there's a bit of a potential misalignment between K-12 and post-secondary education requirements. And then finally, a critical piece of beyond enrolling in post-secondary education is the graduation rate. So approximately nationally, about 60% of students who enroll in post-secondary graduate in 6 years. And the statistics for African Americans and Hispanics is significantly lower, with less than half of African American students who enroll in post-secondary graduating in 6 years, and a little over half of Hispanic students graduating in 6 years. And now I just want to quickly talk about employers' perceptions. So based on discussions with employers and interviews with employers and data from employers, we found that they're finding a lot of difficulty in filling jobs that require cross-cutting skills, so aren't necessarily super specialized, but really require these what we call transferable skills or employability skills, such as critical thinking, collaboration, and digital literacy. These are skills that are transferable from different positions and really are just a minimum expectation of employers that they're finding very difficult to find in new employees. Additionally, their employers have indicated that some of these employability skills are some of the most important skills that students can bring to the job, and they're willing to train them and provide some of that training on the specialization portion, but they need to have some basic skills that are grounded in the employability skills. And then finally, the Manpower Group found that one of the most frequently cited challenges that employers found was that there's a huge talent shortage due to the lack of graduates who actually had mastered employability skills. So this is a real problem moving forward. In terms of student perceptions, it's not such a great picture, truthfully. Less than half of the students, this is based on a Youth Truth survey, which was funded by the Gates Foundation. And in that, we found that less than half of the students agreed with statements that their school had helped match careers with their interests and abilities. So even students who were graduating from high school without really a clear sense or even a loose direction of where they wanted to go. And then again, less than half of students agreed that their school helped them understand the steps to take to have the career they wanted. So students are graduating without any sort of roadmap whether it be very specific or somewhat broad based on interests, students really just weren't receiving the right kind of guidance. So what are the implications for this? The way we see this is that it used to be this kind of dichotomy. Some students were getting all these academic skills and very intensive academic skills because they were going on to post-secondary education. And then some students were receiving training in technical skills because they weren't going to post-secondary education. So it was pretty black and white. And that's sort of an old way of thinking, and a way of thinking that's actually not necessarily productive in terms of the demands of the workplace. So what we see that K-12 systems and even post-secondary institutions have to start thinking about is what we're calling the trifecta, which is a combination of academic, employability, skills, as well as career and industry specialization or experiential learning opportunities. And I do want to say that these are purposely dotted lines between them, because we see that they can when done well, they're integrated and connected in ways that make for meaning for students. So recognizing this sense of urgency, I want to give you a brief overview of what we did. So one of the things that we get is that the integration of academic, workforce, career specialization, employability skills requires the connection and purposeful integration of many factors, including academic standards, employer needs and labor market demands, student interest and skills, on-the-job training, and technical knowledge. This is just some of the factors that come about with an aligned education to workforce pipeline. And it sort of reminds me of trying to keep track of all of the media and figuring out ways of organizing it. You need a system or strategy to bring it together in meaningful ways. And so we really recognize that. And in talking with some of our stakeholders, we also recognized that there were lots of stakeholders who had specialties in ESSA or Perkins or WIOA, but they were finding it more difficult to actually have conversations with one another. And it really came about with one of the requirements in ESSA, where states were really required to engage stakeholders and demonstrate that they had engaged stakeholders as part of the planning process initially. And many of the folks who were not immediately in the state education agency had been consulted and definitely had had conversations with the state education agency folks who were in charge of the ESSA plan. But they had only been consulted. It was more of a one-way street. They hadn't necessarily had really meaningful connections about how federal laws that they are overseeing in the state and or region could have made stronger connections with some of the plans for ESSA and likewise for WIOA. So recognizing this issue, we really tried to bring together this work to try to facilitate conversations and comfort levels of these different stakeholders that are really focused in these different areas to be able to make a more meaningful education to workforce pipeline. And so ESSA primarily focuses on students in public K-12 education. The Perkins 4 is primarily focuses on career and technical education students in high school, as well as students in technical and community colleges, as well as other aspects. But for the purposes of this review, we really focused on those populations. And as far as WIOA is concerned, it's really focused on adult job seekers, dislocated or incumbent workers, and out-of-school youth. And so their purposes are different, but in the recent reauthorization of ESSA, we saw some clear handshakes with these other initiatives. And I'm trying to move it forward, but doesn't seem to be working. Can you move the slide forward? Okay. So I'm having a little difficulty pushing the slide forward, but we basically looked at these laws and we coded them using a methodology that focused on our college and career readiness and success organizer, which is a piece that the College and Career Readiness and Success Center developed to start to think about the complicated environment in which college and career readiness actually operates. So we brought together all of these laws and used qualitative methods in a coding scheme around 4 quadrants of our college and career readiness organizer, and they are goals and expectations, outcomes and measures, resources and structures, and pathways and supports. In all, we ended up with 500 pages of coded material, which aren't you so happy that you don't have to listen to, you don't have to read. And we tested it for inter-rater reliability among the coders to make sure we were being consistent in terms of our understanding of our terms. And we received feedback from many of the folks who are actually on the line, including state career and technical education directors, members of Octave, including Sharon and Robin, thank you very much, as well as other state reviewers from state education agencies. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ellen Cushing, who's going to go into more detail about what we found.
Great, thank you, Susan. I'm wondering if I should just wait until I have control over the slides before moving forward. I think the organizer is really the main way which we tried to look across the laws, or the way that we did look across the laws. So I think it's important to be able to share that.
Zipporah, can you make Ellen the presenter, please? Sorry for the technical difficulties, folks. Well, it looks like her network went down. Hold on.
Okay, so I can share my screen. Can you see the screen now? And it's clear?
Yep.
Okay, great. So this was the slide that Susan just talked through, and I just wanted to highlight it before going into the findings, which I know is what you guys are all excited to hear about. So this is the College and Career Readiness Organizer that really provided the framework for how we looked across these 3 laws. And we wanted to have a common framework to look at them because we recognize that the laws were developed for different populations of students. They were developed by different departments and agencies, and they were also developed at very different points in time. And so having this common framework was really important for us to be able to draw out some of those themes and those opportunities for the education to workforce alignment. So as Susan mentioned, we had about 500 pages of coded material. We went through a rigorous inter-rater calibration, and we had feedback from different stakeholders. So the findings that I'm about to share are really some of those, as I mentioned, those opportunities that we see within these 3 laws. They might not all be applicable to everyone, but we're hoping that they draw some ideas or some inspiration even for you guys to be thinking about these opportunities for alignment. So the findings are divided into the 4 quadrants of the organizer, and the information is really a summary of what we found. There's a lot more information in the brief that we shared earlier, and I'll share in just a second. For each of the findings, we'll also look at how you might be using, or you could use, these resources to dig in a little bit deeper for your own context. And then we also have examples of what some of these findings look like in practice, again, to help kind of ground some of these findings. And then at the very end, after going through all 4 of the quadrants of the organizer. We do have some other resources that are available for you to use if there's a particular finding that you'd like to explore in depth in a little bit more detail. So again, the resources that we are pulling from are threefold. The first is this brief that really sets the context for this conversation and summarizes some of the findings in a narrative. Embedded within the brief is also what we call these summary tables, and we'll see what they look like across the quadrants in more detail in just a minute. But what they do is across the 3 laws, they really share kind of specifically where you would find some of this information in the laws and highlight some of those themes that we saw or that we'll talk about. The second tool is the Excel-based interactive tool. And this allows users to search and sort the 3 laws based on the specific domains of the organizer or any of the specific indicators of the organizer. And the tool itself has 3 tabs that users can access. The first is a tab that's just an introduction to the resource. The second are some directions for how you might use the resource. We know that some folks, including myself, are not as facile with Excel, and so just having some directions for how you might use it and sort it, that's provided on the second tab. And then the third tab is the tool itself. And again, the purpose of this resource is to have to allow users to see the specific language that's in the 3 laws, and then using that specific language to then reference how you might have responded to those requirements or allowances in the laws with your own state or local plan. And then finally, the third resource is really where we see the rubber hitting the road. A major reason that we engaged in this project and took the approach that we did is because we know that the implementation of these 3 laws happens in different agencies and departments in a state and at a local level. And so this workbook is intended to help facilitate conversation for those individuals or teams who are most familiar with each of the 3 laws. It's guided by the structure of the organizer, so again, the 4 quadrants, and the workbook walks experts in the state and local ESSA, Perkins, and WIOA plans through a series of guided questions that are intended to elicit potential opportunities for alignment. So in addition to sharing your plans and implementation efforts, the workbook you can see at the bottom also includes some spaces for you to write down those opportunities that you might want to leverage or develop on across the plans. Key terms that you might want to define. We know that terminology differences are a big challenge when trying to coordinate efforts, and so identifying any key terms that you might want to define, and then identifying any other stakeholders that should be engaged in any future efforts to align some of these opportunities. So now I will begin with the first quadrant, which was, as you recall, the goals and expectations quadrant. And this section really identifies sort of the overarching knowledge, skills, and experiences that students should know and be able to do by the time that they graduate. And so when we looked across the 3 laws, we saw first a focus on rigorous academics. So in ESSA, this really meant challenging academic standards, high school graduation requirements that align with post-secondary entrance requirements, and even industry technical standards. For Perkins, there was this continuous focus throughout the law on ensuring rigorous academics are part of the technical skills development for students. And then in WIOA, we saw that there was this establishing basic levels of ELA, reading, and math. Another common focus that we saw in the laws was around ensuring that learners are aware of workforce needs. And so all 3 laws note the need for educators to be able to communicate and share information with students on labor market needs. And this includes what the future workforce needs are, what specifically employers are looking for in employees, so their demands of employees, and then anything related to emerging industries. And we even saw a particular focus in the laws around emerging industries related to STEM. And then finally, we saw that the laws had this common goals and expectations theme around developing academic, technical, and employability skills in students. And I will say the laws were somewhat varied in their explicitness of this, but we did see this common trend across the three. So in Perkins, particularly in Title I, we saw a lot of focus on developing academic, technical, and employability skills. In ESSA, this was actually part of a provision called the Well-Rounded Education provision, which is a required provision of the law, and there is a definition that's offered within the law, but it's not a required definition. So the offered definition spoke about really expanding students' access to other content beyond ELA and math, so focusing on things like civics or CTE, or even developing those key employability skills in students. But it does allow states to develop their own definition. So really thinking about what it means for a student to be college and career ready and to have that well-rounded education. There's a space within ESSA for states to explore that more. And then finally, in WIOA, we saw this concept really inherent throughout the law, where aligning knowledge and skill development to the direct application to a job was something that was front and center in that legislation. And so here you see an example from the brief. This is our summary analysis table. And you can see kind of some specific areas where we called out these findings. So for ESSA, you can see in the definition that's offered this connection to CTE and other content areas, as well as the opportunity to develop your own definition. Within Perkins, you can see here how Title I requires LEAs to integrate academic and CTE skills, including employability skills in their programs. And then here in WIOA, you see local areas that must provide an integrated education that includes literacy, workforce preparation, and specific workforce training. So when you're thinking about an education to workforce system, here's an opportunity to really enhance your alignment, thinking about what does it mean, what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that students need to have to be college and career ready. When we explored the tool itself, so that Excel-based tool, here you see a screenshot of how I searched and sorted, specifically looking at the goals and expectations quadrant and what the law said specifically to employability skills. So again, you can see I searched in the tool, and then here is just a sample of what I found in terms of what ESSA says, as well as what WIOA says related to specifics around employability skills, where employability skills are referenced. And so if you're trying to figure out how this also might be useful, you can see on the left-hand side, the law that it applies to, the specific title or part or section of the law where you can find this information, if it's related to a state or local requirement or allowance, and then a general topic related to that finding. And so the idea is that you can, if you're looking to explore more what the laws say, you can go here, and then you can go to your own state or local plans and see specifically how you responded to this provision within the law. And then this leads you to the third resource, which is the workbook, which again, as you can see, you can have a facilitated conversation with those who are familiar with each of the three laws. You can see, we know again that there's not one person who could probably speak to the detail, the level of detail and the nuances for each of the three laws. And so what we did is provide some guiding questions that allow experts within the three laws to respond to, and as those responses are happening, you're able to have a conversation around opportunities where you might want to leverage or build on or reference to create that more coherent pipeline. And then as I promised, here's an example of what this could look like in practice. So here is what we see as the Kansas definition of college and career readiness. And this definition has really become an anchor point for other initiatives within the state. So you can see in this definition, we bolded it for you, but there's specific references to developing academic, technical, and employability skills of students. And we know just through conversations and work that we've had with our colleagues in Kansas that this definition has really acted as the guidepost for other initiatives that they're building out, specifically wanting to prioritize or make sure that the employability skills aspect of their definition held as much weight and was as much at the forefront as the other components, particularly the academic preparation and technical skills preparation. And so what we've been able to see with our colleagues in Kansas is that over the years, a couple of the ways that they're trying to underscore the importance of the employability skills, because it is part of their definition of what it means to be college and career ready, is one, they've developed a definition of employability skills. And they're also working on expanding some work-based learning opportunities for students as a way to authentically develop and assess employability skills for students. So really, we wanted to share a definition of college and career readiness because we can see how it can guide decisions at a state and even at a local level to make sure that all of your initiatives, programs, and priorities are all pointing in the same direction over time. So the second quadrant that we looked at is measures and outcomes. And this refers specifically to how the academic, technical, and employability skills are assessed, how they're collected, how they're reported, and then how they're shared more publicly. So first, I'll say that all of the three laws, they have required reporting requirements, but they have required accountability measures that they must report on. But they also allow for additional measures. So the most obvious to us is in the ESSA law that requires this sort of other measure as part of the accountability system. And as part of the list of possible other measures, there's one that's listed as a post-secondary readiness measure. And then there's the final one is just other. So there's this opportunity again for states that are thinking about their college and career readiness vision to include a measure that captures that college and career readiness vision. We also we know that since many of the states are thinking about college and career ready students, there are measures that already exist that look beyond the academic preparation. And that's a prime space that we saw to consider measures from either Perkins or WIOA accountability requirements specifically. This finding was also true around assessments. So there are required assessments amongst the laws, but there's also opportunities to develop new assessments, and that includes new assessments in new content areas, as well as assessments, new types of assessments, such as performance-based assessments, portfolios, or even competency-based assessments. So the point is that there's this opportunity to bring in the great knowledge and expertise and experiences, particularly from the Perkins and WIOA space, to develop more robust measures of academic, technical, and employability skills career readiness. And then finally, this last bullet, each of the laws require data to be collected, stored, and shared. And shared could be either through report cards or data dashboards or whatever different states are using. And we know that while states have made a lot of great progress in developing their state longitudinal data systems, identifying measures that can be integrated into a common system can really help create a more robust college and career ready picture for students. So thinking more about how you might integrate some of the measures and data that's available in Perkins and WIOA and integrate that into the ESSA program and or vice versa. So really thinking about this seamless system of data collection and reporting that spans really from the PK to 12 all the way through the post-secondary and even into the workforce. So again, this is an excerpt from the brief, so you can see the summary table here. And what we see, the blue arrows on the left-hand side show you specifically where you can include measures of post-secondary readiness or other. What we have with Perkins are these secondary reporting requirements that must include technical skills attainment or placement in employment or advanced training, military service, etc. And then finally, within WIOA, we see the performance accountability measures that shall include things like enrollment in post-secondary credentials or employment, and even performance accountabilities around unsubsidized employment after exiting the program. Again, when you're looking at the Excel-based tool, here's just a screenshot of when I searched and sorted around measures and outcomes, and specifically wanted to look at how things were coded related to assessment. So here you can see some of the specifics around Perkins assessment requirements, as well as some of the data around the WIOA assessment requirements. And then just like the other workbook picture that I shared, here's a set of guiding questions that are specific to the measures and outcomes quadrant that are again intended to elicit a conversation amongst experts around their ESSA, Perkins, and WIOA plans, and identify some of the opportunities for stakeholders to engage in conversation and potentially identify those opportunities. And here is an example of the Florida State Longitudinal Data System, or what they call their PK to 20 Educator Information Portal. So Florida is an example of a state that has worked to integrate its SLDS system to include PK to 12, post-secondary, and workforce data. And the SLDS provides stakeholders with information on school and district progress on their college and career-ready goals. And these goals include improving student employment and earning outcomes. But in addition to coordinating this data, Florida ensures that the data is also accessible to different stakeholders, such as parents, students, educators, and policymakers, and that they use their SLDS to identify needs within the broader education system and to establish priorities over time. So they're really looking at the whole life of the student and using that information to inform specific policies, priorities, and programs. So I'm going to, I can go into the next quadrant, which is the resources and structures, but I'm wondering, Susan, if there's any questions that have come through that would be useful to answer, or if I should just keep going.
Hi, Ellen, this is Jenny. If you don't mind giving a little bit more information or repeating how to go about navigating the Excel workbook. That was one of our questions.
Sure. So the workbook itself is, so it's on our website, which I know I saw a couple of links going through, but the link on our website, in which we'll share again at the end of the webinar, you can access the Excel spreadsheet. And I will say the second tab in the Excel spreadsheet has a lot of information on how to use the tool. It probably makes more sense if you're looking at it while you're actually trying to play with the tool. But the idea is that there are different drop-down options or drop-down menu options where you can sort and search based on what you're interested in. And so if you click on, for example, you're interested in what the 3 laws say around goals and outcomes, you can go to the domain it's all color coded, so the green section, and you can click on the X's for goals and outcomes, and you can see what the 3 laws, how they were coded specific to that topic. If you're interested in even more detail, so if you want to know one of the specific indicators within goals and expectations, such as employability skills, you can just click on the employability skills button, or that X, and then you can search the laws that way as well. I will say there's also a big gray button at the top that says clear filter or clear sort. So after you kind of use it to search and sort, I would encourage you to hit that clear filter so that you get sort of a clean slate to then do the next sort of search and filter that you're interested in doing. But there is a lot more detail that I think is easier to access or to understand within the tool itself, rather than me trying to tell you via a webinar how to use it. We also have our contact information at the end of this, so I'm happy to do that in more detail after the webinar as well. Okay, I will go on to the next quadrant then. So the third quadrant is what we're calling resources and structures. And this looks at the institutional assets or the non-student infrastructure that is needed to support college and career readiness. So when we reviewed the 3 laws, the most common institutional asset that we found is really around the quality of the classroom instruction. So as I mentioned in the goals and expectations findings, there is this increased expectation that students are aware of workforce needs. And this really requires educators to also know what industry needs are, both how academic content is applied in the real world, making sure that they're up to date on any technological advances, and that they understand the employability skills that employers are actually looking for. So what we saw here was really an opportunity for co-learning or co-professional development for educators to share their expertise with each other. We know that there's really a wealth of experience and knowledge amongst educators, and these changing demands of the classroom teacher provide a prime opportunity for those educators to share their expertise. And this theme was particularly salient in Perkins and ESSA, with several calls or several places where they called for collaborative professional development between CTE educators and academic educators. When we looked at WIOA, it didn't talk as specifically about professional development amongst these types of educators, but rather talked more about expanding professional development to other stakeholders. And those stakeholders that were listed included professional development for industry folks, higher education, local boards, one-stop providers, and elected officials. The 3 laws also discussed necessary collaboration amongst institutions, so particularly at student transition points. So this looked a little bit like supports around elementary to secondary transition, or secondary to post-secondary, and even post-secondary to workforce. So making sure that there's coordination and alignment across those institutions. And then finally, the laws provided a lot of fiscal autonomy or opportunities for local use of funds. That was something that we, when we looked at any of the fiscal requirements, there was a lot of local control use of those funds. So again, looking at the summary tables, what you see here for ESSA, you see that first bullet around providing joint in-service trainings for teachers in collaboration with CTE educators and institutions of higher education. The second arrow that you see is really focused on integrating academic content and CTE content into instructional practices. When we looked at Perkins, again, you see this professional development that is joint amongst both CTE educators and academic educators. And then finally, in WIOA, you see, again, that broad flexibility in professional development and how those funds are used. As with the others, this summary can help states identify your own practices and then engage in conversations with your ESSA, Perkins, or WIOA peers around what they are doing, and again, potentially identify some areas for collaboration. I didn't share again the search and sort of the Perkins tool, because I figured by now you guys have got it under control. So I just skipped right over to the workbook. But again, these are some of the guided questions for the resources and structures conversation. And as I've read through the findings, particularly for this quadrant, I'm wondering if you guys have any ideas or activities or things that you're doing in your state, district, or school that support the education to workforce pipeline really from the structures and resources place. So I'm going to give you a minute to sort of write that into the questions box. Jenny's going to share that, those strategies that you guys are using, maybe with the larger group. And as you guys are doing that, what I will do is go to the example for this quadrant. So again, it'd be great if you could just share in the questions box any of the strategies or activities that you're doing that really provide the structure and resources to support the education to workforce pipeline. So the example here that I'm going to share is from our colleagues in Maine. And what they embedded in their ESSA plan are these things called intersection workshops. And I learned not too long ago that while this was part of their ESSA plan, the work is funded through their Perkins money. So it's a nice example of the collaboration between the two plans. And these intersection workshops are designed to bring together academic and CTE teachers to conduct crosswalks between their courses. And so it's an opportunity for academic teachers to learn the content application of what they're teaching. And it's an opportunity for CTE educators to really recognize the academic content that's applied in their courses and programs. And I was talking with someone from Maine just last week, and he was sharing how one of the nice outcomes of these workshops has been that they've been able to break down some of the silos that exist amongst these two, quote, types of teachers. And oftentimes these educators, the CTE and the academic, are in the same building and they're just down the hall from each other, but they don't coordinate or collaborate in ways that they really understand their shared impact on what they're doing with each other. And so these intersection workshops are an opportunity to break down those silos and sort of remove any preconceived ideas of the academic side being scary or the application to the real world being scary, and just started promoting those conversations. So that's been one of the nice outcomes of these intersection workshops. Jenny, before I go into the next section, I'm wondering if there's any of the examples from our colleagues that you'd be able to share.
Well, I just got a few in and I'm going to push them out to everybody. But before I do that, or while I'm doing that, we did have a question, Ellen. Someone was hoping that we could share some examples of how the coordination is happening with elementary level teachers, noting that there's some difficulty getting some buy-in with elementary educators.
And can you just be a little more specific about coordination of what are you looking at, or the buy-in challenges that you're referring to around this whole coordination, or academic and technical and employability skills? I'm not sure.
That was all that was written in as a question. So I think it was in the combining on the CTE side in terms of getting that the elementary school teachers interested in it rather than just seeing that as a secondary school responsibility.
Sure. So I can talk about it, you know, from the perspective of our content center. So one of the things that we're looking at is this. It's a continuum of college and career readiness for students, and so while things like work-based learning or apprenticeships even happen at the secondary level, there's a lot of work that happens at the elementary and middle school levels to develop that career readiness in students. And so that could be things like career exploration or even career awareness activities. And so I think if you're able to talk about it from a lens of you know, sharing what the career looks like, whether that be a CTE teacher or even industry representatives, bringing that down to earlier grades really behooves those students in identifying those areas that they are interested in exploring in more detail when they get to their later levels. So I'm not sure, Sharon, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm wondering if you have any examples too that you'd like to share from the work that you've been aware of.
Sure. So thank you. One of the things, at least with Perkins, the Perkins dollars that go out can only be spent at the middle and high school, and of course, the post-secondary level. So they can't be used for activities that go below the 7th grade level. However, most states are using some of their state and or local resources and providing, I would say virtually every state does, some type of, career development, exposure, awareness, whether it's, career fairs, visits by, parents and grandparents of schools, all those type of things that schools can do to provide students with exposure so that when they do get into the 7th grade that they can start doing, even more career development and beginning to really think more thoroughly and thoughtfully about the types of things that they might be interested in, and even doing some initial introductory to careers courses. Some of that starts at the 7th and 8th grade level. And then, of course, as they get into the high school level, they begin, delving a little bit deeper into, the real true career and technical education courses that teach the technical skill content that are needed for at least the beginnings of some industry recognized certifications, and then at the post-secondary level continuing that on. So I hope that addresses, so that's probably why, at least in these, in the materials and the resources that you have, that there really are going to be more targeted towards middle school and high school and beyond levels.
Great, thank you so much. And I have seen some of these great examples being shared within our own questions and answers box. So I assume, Jenny, that those are being shared with the larger group so that we can all learn the great work that we're all doing. I'm going to keep moving on just to get to the last quadrant, and then again to share some resources for you all. So the fourth and final quadrant that we looked at focuses on pathways and supports, or the coordinated supports and services that help individual students with their college and career readiness development. And here we saw the laws discussing curriculum specifically that promotes real-world application. So this often included opportunities for work-based learning, or again, real-world application of content. And the support services that are crucial for ensuring students are able to access knowledge and be successful. So these services, these supportive services, included services like healthcare, mental and drug counseling, transportation services, housing support, and tuition reimbursement. And we saw all three laws tackle some combination of these supportive services. And so where we saw an opportunity is to align these services in a more coordinated effort so that you can increase efficiency within the services, potentially reduce costs, and even offer more holistic supports for students. Finally, we saw this common theme on career awareness and career pathways. So again, going back to that slide that Susan talked about students' own perceptions of their career readiness. And here the laws talked in different ways, but in similar ways, around making sure that students have individualized learning plans or individualized plans for their careers, that there is this undercurrent of ensuring that there are guidance counselors or school counselors or mentors to support those learners in achieving their career pathways, their career plans, making sure that they have the right sequence of courses, that they have the right exposure to experiences, and that they do have an idea of the pathway that they need to go in order to get the type of career or be in the industry that they are most interested in, or that's based on their own abilities and interests. And so when we looked again at the themes across the laws, here you can see within ESSA the supports of experiential learning to promote skills attainment for in-demand occupations, as well as, if appropriate, that LEAs must support programs that integrate work-based learning opportunities that interact with industry professionals, and again, if appropriate, provide academic credit. Within Perkins, we saw this inclusion around work-based learning, again, and work-related experiences, and this focus on promoting industry partnerships. And then finally, in WIOA, this focus on implementing career pathways and providing services related to those individual student career pathways. So similar to the last quadrant, we would love to capture some of the work that you are all doing related to pathways and supports. So if you could just share in the questions box some of your state, district, and school services and supports that promote career readiness development in students. And we recognize that it might be hard to tease those out from other activities, but we'd love to learn a little bit more about what you're doing and share that with the rest of your colleagues on the webinar. And while we're doing that, I will share just one last example from the field, which is the example that just recently launched called the Massachusetts Credit for Prior Learning. So this is an online resource that was developed by the 15 community colleges within the state. And what it does is it allows students or learners to identify their areas of interest or their program of interest. And then what it does is it walks them through a series of questions and opportunities for them to identify some of their existing experience or knowledge. And what it is intended to do ultimately is give them credit for any of their prior learning that they might have. And so in addition to identifying that prior credit, this program also matches the students with counselors and mentors that are partners with them throughout the process, and is really intended, again, to help them match some of the experience that they might have already with those industries where they're interested in developing their degree. So now we have our second polling question, and I'd love for you guys to just take a minute. As you know, we have these resources that we've put together. We've shared a little bit about how we've used them to identify themes or opportunities, and what we do is we'd love to learn a little bit more about how you might use these tools in your own context. Okay. So looking at the polling results, what I see is that I'm not sure if you can see the polling results, but it's great to know that it seems like a lot of the participants, 61% see using these tools to start discussions with colleagues. Another 33% see this as opportunities to identify opportunities to align ESSA, Perkins, and WIOA. And then about 7% of respondents will use them to develop a local plan. Great. We really hope that these are resources that are useful to you all as you engage in these conversations. We do think that starting the discussions are the very first step. So we're very excited to see that a lot of folks see that as a useful next step with these tools. So Jenny, I just wanted to circle back before we share any additional resources that you've been able to share some of the strategies and resources and activities that our colleagues on the webinar have done related to the resources and structures. I'm sorry, pathways.
Yes, I have pushed those out and answered. We did have one question. I don't know if you or Sharon are able to answer that I also pushed out to the larger group. It was on how Vermont assesses the demonstration of employability skills.
So I know that we have colleagues from Vermont on the call, but the line's not opened up for them to speak. So maybe that's something that after the webinar, we can actually follow up with the person. Oh, it looks like she might have responded in the chat box. It looks like
so it looks like, Go ahead, Ellen.
I was going to say, to those on the call, it looks like it's up to local school boards on how they want to measure employability skills. Okay. It's incorporated into graduation requirements, so you have to prove that you are proficient in it. And that's all that I see. But I'm gonna keep moving on. But if there's additional details, please share them. And what we'll do is make sure that anyone who is interested in hearing more details, that we communicate that out. Okay, so just closing up today's webinar. We know that we shared a lot of content, a lot of information with you all. And as I started with the findings discussion, that all of these opportunities might not be relevant to you at this point in time, nor may they align with some of the areas that you are interested in exploring as a state or as a local entity. And so what we wanted to do is just share quickly some additional resources that you might find interesting or helpful as you do engage in one or more of these findings from our project. So the first resource is from, actually I should say all of these resources are from the College and Career Readiness Center. So they are all on our website, and I've provided the URL at the bottom of them, but we'll also, as you get the slides, they'll be in the slides as well. So the first resource is a brief called Leveraging ESSA to Support State Visions of College and Career Readiness. And this brief identifies 3 main opportunities for college and career readiness within ESSA. One around accountability measures, another around assessment, and the third around this provision of well-rounded education. And so the brief is really an introduction to this idea. And the second brief, which is the second in the series, well, it's a series of 2, so it's the second and final. The second brief around college and career readiness begins with a well-rounded education, opportunities under ESSA. And what this brief does is it further defines how the well-rounded education provision can be used to promote college and career readiness within state and local plans. And it particularly identifies opportunities for alignment across state visions for college and career readiness, state standards, graduation requirements, post-secondary entrance requirements, and industry certification requirements. The third resource that we think might be useful is the CCRS Center Interactive Map. So this resource allows you to search by a single state across multiple topics or across multiple states on single topics. And what it does is there's a series of topics that you can explore. So there's ones around college and career ready definitions. What are state college and career ready definitions? If you're interested in what your own state definition is, you can search that. Or if you're interested in what other states have defined as their college and career readiness definition, you can use it that way. There's also information around accountability metrics and college and career ready reporting metrics, as well as information around career exploration and career plans. The next resource unpacks the data finding that we shared under the measures and outcomes. So this resource, Harnessing the Potential of SLDS Systems, provides short case summaries of state profiles that describes how they're using their SLDS to answer college and career ready questions, and any of the lessons learned that they've had as a result of doing that work. The next resource is our Employability Skills Professional Learning module. So this is a resource that was developed closely with our friends at Octave, but it introduces a employability skills framework or a definition of employability skills, talks about how you connect it to key initiatives in a state. It also talks about bringing the employability skills development down to the classroom level. And so in there are a couple of tools and resources where you can, teachers can actually use them and do a self-assessment of their lesson plans and see how they're integrating employability skills into their lessons. You can do it at a individual lesson plan level or as a summative inventory of lesson plans to ensure that you're covering both the breadth of employability skills and the depth of employability skills. The other piece that I just wanted to mention is that it talks about how you can prioritize employability skills from different perspectives. And so you can think about it from the state level, the employer level, the district level, and individual teachers. The other thing about the employability skills module is that it's intended to be a train the trainer resource. So these materials can be taken and customized and modified based on how you need to use them. There's a PowerPoint deck that you can use as well as a facilitator's guide with facilitator notes for each of the slides. And then the final resource is the College and Career Readiness Organizer Self-Assessment. So it's the same organizer that we used as the framework for this, this project. What it does is it allows you to select the perspective with which you want to take the self-assessment. So you can take it from a state perspective or from a district perspective. And it asks you a series of questions for each of the 4 quadrants. We call it sort of a Cosmo quiz of sorts because you answer the questions on a scale of always, sometimes, never. And as you go through the questions, at the end, you get this final report of readiness on each of the quadrants. So for those areas where you're very strong, you can see those areas. In areas where you might have some opportunity for growth, what we do is connect you right back to some resources that might be useful to help you develop stronger in those areas. I did see a question come through about the cost of these resources. These resources are all free. So as part of the CCRS Center, you can use them and access them as you need, and there's no cost to you. So just wanted to make sure I shared that with the larger group, because if one person has it, I'm sure others have it as well. So before we jump to that, I did see another question come through, and I wanted to address it. It's a little odd to address it at the end, but there are some questions around connecting this work to IDEA or other federal laws. We did start with ESSA, Perkins, and WIOA just because we saw those as key levers within this education to workforce pipeline, but we know that they're not the only levers. We know that IDEA, for one, has a huge potential in this space, as well as the Higher Education Act, if that does get reauthorized. And so we do have plans, or we do hope to include those as a similar analysis and include them in this work in the future. We just didn't do that for this project because we were new to this, and we're really starting with the 3 laws that we thought were most impactful for the education to workforce. But we do have high hopes to include those in the future. So thank you for that comment. So finally, just to close out, we do ask that as you leave, just please complete this post-webinar survey. It includes a lot of great information and feedback for us to continue to make sure that we're meeting your needs and that the information and tools and resources that we provide are most useful to you. And so please complete the post-webinar survey. And then, there's a space in the survey, but also I encourage you to use the questions box as you have used all webinar. If there is any additional support or any other additional information that would be helpful to you to continue to do this work, to think about this work more deeply, or to take any action on this work, please let us know. We're more than open to those ideas, and again, we really want to make sure that we're serving your needs. So please share that. And with that, I have nothing else. So I think I'm going to close this out. I think that's my job. But I just wanted to take the time to say thank you to all of you who have stayed on for so long. I know we went a couple minutes over. I'd like to say thank you to Susan for your introductions and context-setting remarks, and a very special thank you to Sharon for your great insights, your great collaboration, and your colleagues at Octave as well. So with that, I thank you all and look forward to hearing from you soon. Have a great day.